Well, hello, Sandy. How are you today?
Good morning, Amy. Positivity shines through. I'm good.
Positivity shines through. Good. Um, I'm going to tell you, I've been thinking a lot about this growth mindset and all the discussions we've been having. And I came to a realization recently that I have a bit of a fixed mindset about some things. And it's like those things that are not my strengths. And I just give myself a pass and say, uh, I'm not good at that. So I'm not even going to try to learn about it. And I'm just going to delegate it to somebody else. And so because I'm always like, I have a growth mindset. But then I was like, well, on some things I don't.
And so are you finding yourself with the self-awareness saying, I'm going to try? Are you challenging yourself then to say, I'm going to use a growth mindset on this?
No,
Right.
because I don't, well, on some things, I'm like, I should probably learn more to understand. But then some of it, I was like, I'm really not that interested. And I'm just going to let somebody else do it. And I will focus on the things that I enjoy. And so, anyway,
I think you're deploying a growth mindset by making that decision, though. You thoughtfully said, I can more efficiently do this by having somebody else do it. Because a growth mindset isn't that you do everything, but it's also
yep,
getting
yeah,
past stopping it. So,
yeah,
you have
I
done the
get it.
growth mindset. I
All
like.
right. Well, I also give myself a pass not to learn about certain things.
My takeaway that I'm with you. I've been thinking about growth mindset too. And I love the term. And we talked about people that we work with, in consulting and coaching. I actually added to my website under my coaching page. And again, I'm depending on when this podcast is dropped, I'm in the middle of going live on a new website. But on the coaching page, I'm very specific in the very top line saying I coach people with a growth mindset because for me, I'm not an effective coach or a consultant actually, but mainly a coach because the coaching is they're doing the action. I'm coaching them but they have to have a growth mindset or we'll never be successful. And
Yeah.
so my takeaway from it was I was very specific in the website, but also when I'm talking to people, if I feel like they're not in that growth mindset, back to my little card that says the asshole, nobody's going to win. It's a waste of their money,
Yeah.
right? And so it's not about me being, but that was kind of my takeaway. So again, back to why I love our conversations is they make me think.
Yeah.
So they make me act.
And me too. And it makes me apply it to not just myself, but in my interactions with all my clients and my family and my friends and everything. So that's good stuff. Okay. So today we're moving on and we could keep talking about growth mindset because
Oh,
as
I
you're
was
talking,
sitting there,
I
my
was like,
brain's going.
oh, there's something else I was going to say. I was like, I just need to wrap this up and move on. We're going to talk about servant leadership, which is another topic that tends to be, it comes up a lot on LinkedIn and other things. People say servant leadership. And so, do you know much about servant leadership?
I do, but I'd love to hear your research. I mean, what I'd say is to me, servant leadership is something once it was formally introduced to me as a study, as reading about it, seeing it in action. I had already been in the workplace and gone, been a part of leadership, been guided the whole bit before I really understood what it was. And I quickly was able to see in my past what it was and what it wasn't, which was kind of an interesting reflection because it came later in my career that I had heard about it.
Yeah.
But it's so, I love these little phrases, buzzwords, research that I didn't know a lot about because it seemed so obvious and so natural as a way to want to lead. And I loved it because by that time I had seen it in action and it was so much more successful. So I would love to hear a little bit more about the white paper I've done since we put this since that time I was introduced to it, and since we talked about it last week, I've done more research, and there's so much out there on servant leadership. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion. How about you, Amy? How long have
Yeah,
you been familiar with it?
not very long, not in a formal sense. I would say probably about 5 years. I remember about 5 years ago, I was working with somebody and he talked about servant leadership. And in my mind, I just thought, oh, it's a leader that serves others versus, which is kind of what it is. That's kind of the gist of it. But I didn't realize it was like a thing. I just thought it was like his terminology. So I've learned though that this is something that from my research, I started researching it, you know me. It was actually developed in the 70s.
Yeah.
And the idea is that leaders prioritize serving the greater good. So it's not, so this leaders with this style serve their team and organization first. They don't prioritize their own objectives.
Which is I reading about where it came from is that Greenleaf had done the first big study in the 70s, and he had read a book that was written in the 1930s about how there was a group of servants, and there actually was a servant leader in it, but they didn't know until that leader left. And so the story talks about how when this servant left and they all kind of fell apart, but they never really thought of him as the leader. It wasn't a hierarchical setup. And that's where this started flowing with him on that's the best way to lead. And it's the most effective way to lead. And I thought how interesting that he was reading this book. And then there's their whole website, there's a whole institute from this Greenleaf and what he has done with servant leadership, but how interesting that he was reading a book and his light bulb went on.
Mm-hmm.
And so servant leadership, it had been out there, but he coined it a phrase and he started teaching it. I think he started with AT&T back in the 70s.
Yeah.
But so opposite, because it was in that era, the 60s is all about a hierarchy,
Right.
where you were at in the team. And that's how everything was part of that pyramid going up to the top, and it turned things upside down. I think people still get a little confused on it because it's so easy to envision who do you report to, who calls the shots, how does that work? But the effectiveness of those teams comes back in not on power, but on the trust that comes with being able to put them first.
Right.
Logical, but difficult. How about that?
Very much so. So some things that happen with servant leadership is it's a lot about empowerment. It's about empowering in the hierarchy. If there's a traditional hierarchy, it's about empowering the people on the bottom of the hierarchy. I don't know how to say this politically correct. I don't want to be mean, but the lower levels, empowering them, and the people traditionally in the higher levels making the decisions are more there to support them and empower them and remove obstacles so that they can feel successful. So it encourages creative thinking, it encourages decision-making ability for everybody, and self-confidence, risk-taking, and then a lot of collaboration has to happen also.
And I think one big thing to remember with servant leadership is it's so easy to hear it and think, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not part of a big organization. This isn't big organizational structure. This happens in day to day. It could be, I have thought about examples of me chairing a committee with 4 people, with how I work with people on my team. Even if the organization might not follow that, you can lead your team no matter what the size. And I, have a great example of something that happened this week with a client that I'm consulting that now it's more as an ad needed basis, but she's working with someone else back to kind of hierarchy, I'm leading, I'm making the final call, but how she pointed out in, without using the word servant leadership, how she felt more engaged, empowered, and she was really giving much more of a result when she was when she was elevated to that level of making her voice matter. But it's at all levels. It doesn't have to be AT&T. You don't have to be building a 100-person organization to deploy servant leadership.
Right. And it's kind of making, and I don't want to say it's not making the assumption that people need help, because that's assuming they're not capable of it. So you're not like just jumping in and helping. You're just jumping in and supporting and making sure, asking the questions and, seeing if there's obstacles, because jumping in and just helping,
right?
Some people might take it as that, and that doesn't build self-confidence. That doesn't empower people. That just makes them think that you don't think they're capable.
Right.
So there's two different ways of approaching it. And so you have to be careful that you don't think it's that.
So I think this is interesting, just as an example, again, interesting that this came up the week that we're talking about servant leadership, but maybe it's putting my radar on a bit. Back to the client that I've been a little more hands-on in the past in overseeing what they're doing, checking their work, basically making sure that at the end of the day, what we're pulling together is good to put out to the public. So it's leadership. I'm overseeing. At the end of the day, the buck stops with me. And I haven't been doing that. Someone else has taken over. They've changed their organizational structure. And she had a quick call with me, and she ended up kind of going on and on to me about how much she missed working with me. And I'm not trying to pat my back. In this situation, I definitely was a good servant leader to her. And when she was comparing and contrasting, she said, it's all about who takes credit, telling me what to do, not asking for my input. We learned by trial and error when we, being she and I, did it. And now that trial and error doesn't mean anything. And the bottom line was, I thought, the person who stepped in, I think, wanted to prove themselves and say that they were worthy. And rather than saying, I'm going to make decisions, but help me understand and let's work on this together. So there is an element of rolling up your sleeves to understand, but then also talking to the person and saying, how can we best work together? You've got this knowledge. I came on because I brought this to the table. Part of it is taking that, putting it back to trust and authenticity, and not feeling like you're vulnerable to not looking like a leader by asking questions. And that's tough for people. Right. But in the end, she's not giving her 100% that she used to, because she's feeling, what's the point? Yeah. What's the point? And we never thought about it at the time, but I really miss working with her too. Honestly, it was a great partnership that we got a good end product. And it was a good reminder for me on the next client I work with to put my guard down, to seek to understand how they do things, seek to understand how we can build that trust together and still have our levels, right? It's not about me doing her job, but how can we do that together? But a very interesting study this week, as I had been reading about this and reinforcing it's okay to be the leader and ask questions and allow yourself to be vulnerable without looking like you're not worthy of being the leader.
Right. Because I do think for the people in a traditional mindset, they look at servant leadership as a weakness. Like, it's not somebody just jumping in and taking control and making decisions. Mm-hmm. It's somebody who's collaborating, asking questions, empowering others. And I work with somebody who is more traditional. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of the leader, and she's more traditional, following my lead. And she asked of me things that make me uncomfortable. Like she wants me to make a decision on things, and I always come back to her and I'm like, well, so give me the options and then let me know, what do you think? What's your, so I'm always encouraging her to think through the options and then make a recommendation. Like, what do you think? Which direction do you think we should go? And so I can tell she's uncomfortable with it because she wants me just to make a decision. So it's so interesting to me because whenever we have a conversation, I'm always like, all right, I have to like encourage her, empower her. And it's just an interesting shift. And most people I work with, we're very collaborative and people are comfortable stepping up and being empowered. But there's a few people who are of that traditional mindset where this person makes the decision and we all just follow.
Which is a great point, Amy, because a person would say, oh, servant leadership, that's what everyone wants. It's up to the leader to make the choice, but it goes both ways.
Right.
Because there are many times that the person on the lower end of the hierarchy doesn't want that kind of leadership either.
No, they just want to be told what to do.
So it really is stepping in, phasing, because maybe it's in a problem solving mode, right? That we have a problem to solve. And I would tell you, the lady I'm talking about, that's how this started with us, where we really put our guard down, is a couple of times when things were wrong and I couldn't figure it out. We just literally, we put our sleeves up and we brainstormed together. And then, I took it to the next level, make sure we had the buy-in, but sometimes it does take more of a, outside the normal day. I don't want to say crisis mode, but a point of intersection where you can both get to that level.
Yeah. It's interesting. So there's some pros and cons to servant leadership. All right. So some of the pros are, number one, you develop future leaders by empowering and collaborating and letting them go through the decision processes and the options, and it develops them for future leadership. There's so many pros to it. It builds trust, greater ownership, responsibility, innovation, curiosity. We talked about this before, and you said it just a little bit, it shows you're vulnerable, that you're not like, this is the way it has to be, this is the way it is.
Or not all knowing.
All knowing. Yeah, you're not all knowing. You can't be a servant leader and be all knowing, right? You have to be of the growth mindset. People feel more valued and appreciated. And I think the example you gave was spot on for that.
I'll give you another example. I was sitting in a board meeting and one of the hands-on people, one of the operational managers, was taking minutes for the board meeting. And she didn't have a lot of input because it's a board meeting where the board meeting come together. And there was a discussion about where a couple of people kept going back and forth on figuring out what the customer wanted. And should we send out surveys? Where are we getting this? And we kept talking and discussing. And I looked at her and I said, what are you hearing? Because she's in the trenches, right? So we can send out every survey in the world. We can try to get all this data, but it's like, why aren't we asking input from the person who's working with the salespeople, to me, it was so, and everybody was like, oh, well, that makes a ton of sense. But we get so caught up in our leadership. How are we going to formalize? Who has the best idea? Who has the MBA form that shows how we're going to gather the information? But part of empowering people in showing trust with them is that you trust their input too. And those that get most of it, which is the people in the trenches, have the best input too.
Yeah. It's not I need to solve this problem. It's like, how can we solve this problem?
Right.
Who can help us solve this? So it's a little bit out of the I.
So I have I have a question. We'll go back to the pros, but
Okay.
one thing that became very evident to me as I was researching this the last week and thinking about it is we're in a time period right now where servant leadership, I think, is very important because it's what's wanted by workers. If you think about the Great Resignation, okay,
Yeah.
if you think about what people are looking for, of course, yes, they want to work at home more, they want this, but those things are deep set with trust, with being valued, with wanting to make their time most beneficial, right? They don't want to just be checking boxes and dealing with hierarchical minutia.
Right.
To me, generationally, and some of the issues that are happening really are against the old philosophy of leadership and very much embrace servant leadership. And I'd be curious what you think about it. And the other thing I'd say is the Me Too revolution. I'm listening to Katie Couric's audiobook right now.
Uh-huh.
And it's very interesting from a lot of aspects, but going through her journalistic history and reliving these different time periods and the players and things that we saw on TV and listening to her talk about how it played out in the interviews, what have you. But now she's talking obviously before Me Too, because she's in those early years. And I thought everything about pre-Me Too was about power. Well, they had power you couldn't ask. It was, you had your place, you did not ask. And I think that's another, what do I say, point in time now where that whole, because you're empowered doesn't mean you have the final say. So I think servant leadership is being pushed out from a lot of things that are happening in our time too. So we it's more than a fluff word. My point is,
Yeah.
It's our world. And if we want to retain people, we want to keep people happy, we have to embrace servant leadership.
Yes. Yes, completely agree. As you're sitting here talking, I was thinking about one of my first jobs, and I remember feeling so unvalued because our boss was the traditional, this is how you do it. I make all the decisions. And by golly, if you make a decision, it better be exactly what the decision I made. Like there was no room for any mistakes.
Your input isn't valued.
No, it was not valued. And I was so quick to get out of there. It was like, ooh, I see my escape. I'm out. Shoo. But the interesting thing was his boss was wonderful. Like my boss's boss was the type of person who was a servant leader. He would come up and we would talk and he would ask me questions, ask for my input, and completely different style. And I'm not sure why my boss was where he was, because that wasn't the culture of the whole organization. But for some reason, well, I'll tell you what it was. It's because I'm not going to tell you where it was, but they were so focused on production. And then he was able to make sure production kept going and it never stopped and numbers were good. You know what I mean? Quality was good, numbers were good because
so what's coming, the key theme, and again, one of my passions, almost everything I call myself now value consultant. I'm like, if I could sum up what I am, it is, you'll see on my new webpage, I'm like, I'm a value consultant. That's what I do.
Great. Good for you.
Everything we're talking about is embedded in value. And so back to being valued, if you think about traditional versus servant leadership, you're really you're getting valued for what you bring to the table. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you think, well, why is the old leadership, why does that still hang on? Well, let's say back to your situation, how would you feel valued? Right. A promotion, more money. That's kind of part of that, a promotion, a pat on the back. You've moved up the ladder, back to that moving up the ladder, and how we have our heads around our value is on that linear, how far can I get up the ladder? Because it's embedded in, that's the value. And it must be because my input is good or what I did is good, but it really is counterintuitive to what you're trying to accomplish with servant leadership. But that's embedded in our business system mindsets.
Yes, it is especially traditionally. Now, one thing about servant leadership that I saw was if you have customers, it's more important to serve the employees of the company than the customers. So as a leader, your job is to make sure your employees are happy, your employees, that they're feeling empowered, because that'll translate to customer satisfaction. And that's the goal. So I thought that was really interesting, because a lot of times the leaders are more like, whatever the customer says, we're doing. It's either I'm saying it or the customer is saying. But this is more giving the employees the empowerment.
I had to read that a few times too, because I have an interesting situation that I dealt with that was kind of flipped, but does that work? Do you put the employees first all the time? But I think the reality is, by saying the employees are first, you're not saying, okay, we're going to treat the customers like crap,
No,
so
no.
that doesn't mean that.
Yeah, right.
So focus on the employees, it's going to take care of everything else.
Yes.
But of course, back to, we're going to keep the customers happy first. But if you keep your employees happy, you keep the customers happy. What was interesting is in healthcare, if you were to ask, and we did a study where you ask the smaller practices, who is your boss? I'm sorry, who is your customer? Okay, who is your customer? Yeah. And you know what they would say? The doctor. We serve the doctor. Who do you serve? We serve the doctor. And because, and if you think about small offices, and I worked a lot in this, everything was about keeping the doctor happy. So right. What I want you to think about is yourself as the customer. So think about when you go, everybody has situations where they've gone to medical offices and the front desk doesn't pay any attention to them. Could care less if they were out there for 2 hours. Well, you're not the customer. They're serving the doctor, and they're keeping the doctor happy. And isn't that interesting? Back to what you put first, the leader is first. You're serving the leader. And so if you flip that and you serve the thought process is, no, we're going to serve the patient. But in reality, the light bulb that came on to me is that didn't quite work either, because it's a stressful environment and they needed to serve those employees first. And that would relate to the patient, which I think now with COVID, it's very apparent with my example, because people are burnt out. You have to serve them first, because if you serve the patient, we wouldn't have a workforce in healthcare.
Yes. Yeah. It's so true. That is so true. Interesting. So those are some of the pros. Now, what are the cons? Cons are, it can be very time consuming for leaders, because you have to have time for collaboration. You have time for conversations. You have to have time to develop your employees so that they feel comfortable, feeling empowered. It doesn't happen overnight. Especially if you're in a traditional, like that doctor's office, you're in this traditional, like I'm serving the doctor and trying to keep him on schedule, keep him or her happy, everything's revolving around the doctor. Then the shift would not happen overnight. It takes some time. It can be a concept that's difficult to communicate, to explain to people.
I saw that a lot in a lot of different articles, that it's so easier to say, here's our org chart. Here's who you report to. Here's when you're up for a raise. Here's when you're up for a promotion, and it's a check the box. That's so much easier than the other way.
Yeah, because this is kind of, it's kind of squishy. It's not defined. Like it could happen very organically. Mm-hmm. And the right people have to be in the right positions for it to happen.
Right.
It just doesn't, different leadership styles across teams can cause confusion. So, if you're the person in the org chart right next to you has a traditional mindset and you are trying to be a servant leader, and the two of you, it can be very confusing for everybody.
Very good point.
Yeah. It can be out of sync with corporate performance management and incentive systems. And this is kind of talking to your, you get promoted, you get a raise, like that, all that structure.
Right. Which is a point of value and something to aim for. And same with sales metrics. Your point in the guy or gal that was all about production. Well, I work on that business side, and I have to tell people this is not a not-for-profit. This is a for-profit. So
Right.
we have to have, we can't have a profitable business without profits. So it's
Right.
that fine line, but it's a reality. It's a reality.
Right.
We all like to be warm and fuzzy, but companies need salespeople. They need to hit numbers. They need to hit their projections or try. I mean, that's a reality. So how do you do that and mix it with putting the employee first?
Right. I think that's the biggest reality check right there, is this balancing the servant leadership with all the metrics that you're measuring. Like,
Right.
how does it all match up, and can you still maintain your goals and be a servant leader? I think it's hard. It's not just a check, I can do this and we're all going to be great. There's going to be growing pains and
Right.
understanding and making sure you're measuring the right things too.
And I think there needs to be structure, but I think it's where they intersect each other, meaning
Yeah.
don't go so heavy on the structure that there's no room for input. And then if you put a framework around it, you've got the structure that humans desire and know, but then allow yourself to be able to be creative in workspaces
Yeah.
that people are allowed to grow.
All right. So I'm going to go really quick. We're running short on time.
Okay.
Some ways to become an effective leader, servant leader: have strong communication skills,
Boom.
have good listening skills. Boom.
Boom.
You can just say boom every time.
Boom.
Develop empathy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think that's huge. Work on your self-awareness. Yes. Work on your selflessness. Keep the organization's goals in mind. So that's those metrics that we're measuring. And learn how to develop others holistically, their decision-making skills, communication skills, and big picture thinking. So there's some ideas for you.
I'll throw out one thing to go with that and to loop back while we close out here. That'd be a perfect example. You named several of those. And I've heard people say before things like leaders, well, I don't have empathy. I'm not good at connecting with people. Have a growth mindset. And instead of saying, I can't do that, find a different way to do it. Don't just say, I can't do that. I'm not good at that. I don't like to talk to people. Well, you don't have to ask them about their kids if you're not comfortable with that, but maybe learn about their work style. There's different ways to get to know people. There's different ways to empathize and listen. Don't say you can't do it. Have the growth mindset to do and employ all these different avenues to engage as a servant leader.
Yeah.
Boom.
Great.
Yeah.
Boom.
Boom.
Boom. Yes. Sandy, thank you again for this great conversation. I always love doing the research. I always love hearing your insights and having this conversation. So thanks.
You're welcome, and have a great week. And we'll both ponder on this. And I'm sure we'll come off with some stories to start our next podcast.
Right. Yes.
Bye, Amy.
Bye.